Most of you have heard of this, the biblical story of David and Goliath. And I think most of us take the story of David and Goliath as kind of, David was the underdog that showed up and won this battle to the surprise of everybody. And I do think he surprised everybody, but I think if you really look at the facts around what we know about that whole battle, I think once you understand the whole battle, maybe he wasn't quite such an underdog. Maybe he was actually very prepared, and maybe Goliath wasn't exactly who you think he was. You gotta remember this, David was a sheep herder, nothing fancy. He was out guarding the sheep. And he actually went to that battle, I believe, to bring food to his brothers, I think is the reason he went. And he went there and no one would face Goliath. Now Goliath was this guy who was, 7, 8, 9 feet tall, however tall he was, he's considered a giant, okay? And they'd made a deal in those days that they said the two armies fighting each other, one person from this side and one person would fight each other, and that would determine the outcome of the battle. So they said, okay, Goliath, you're going to, fight for this side. And they couldn't find anybody that would step up to fight this giant of a man. And so when David shows up, David said, well, I will do it, and he had his whole faith and religion behind him, his belief system behind him. But let me tell you one more thing, okay? David was a sheep herder for years. His main tool, his main weapon to protect the sheep was his sling. And back in those days, you had the infantry, which Goliath was really, that's what he was. He was an infantryman, and they'd wear their armor and they would fight hand-to-hand combat, okay? Well, if you're a giant and you're fighting hand-to-hand combat, that helps, okay? Well, David was this little sheep herder kid who was, probably weighed less than half of what Goliath weighed. But David had something called a sling. And back in those days, the sling was actually like artillery is today. And those guys would get so good, they could hit the size of a quarter as far as they could see the quarter. They could hit birds out of the air with that sling. The sling had a stopping power of right around a .45 caliber handgun. So this was not just a little, like a slingshot shooting little pebbles. This was a real weapon. And they were very accurate with it. It had very strong power. It would shoot those rocks out at roughly 100 miles an hour. And so if he could hit a quarter, size of a quarter, as far as he could see, well, that's a pretty good aim. Well, what happened was, in the story in the Bible, it talks about that he accepts the challenge. Well, King Saul is going to give him his armor. So he puts all this armor on that probably weighed almost as much as he did. And he said, I can't fight in this. So he took all his armor, his armor off. And it was the best armor in the land was King Saul's, but he says, this doesn't fit me. This isn't me, and this isn't who I am. So he took it all off. He said, I'm going to go just with me. So he reached down and picks up 5 stones and grabs his sling and starts walking down. Meanwhile, Goliath, the hero of the other side, the giant, the one that everybody was afraid of, he starts walking down the hill to this battleground area where he believes they're going to fight hand to hand. And the Bible talks, he actually had someone that lead him down the path. And there's a few things that are mentioned in the story about Goliath that appears that maybe he might have had a disease, and it's a disease that kind of caused him to be so big. It has a whole lot of syllables to it, so I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, but this disease causes a couple real common things. It causes nearsightedness. And so he couldn't see the path very good because he was nearsighted. He also has told David, hey, he was actually carrying a sling, the sling was hanging, and David thought it was, or Goliath actually thought it was sticks. He said, "What? You're coming to fight me with sticks, multiple sticks." He used the word S at the end of it, sticks. And he didn't have sticks. He just had a sling that was hanging down. So he apparently didn't have very good eyesight, and he wasn't very limber and very mobile because of this disease. He was just big, and he could overwhelm his enemies with his size, okay? But David had protected his flock and protected himself against bears and lions and everything else with a sling. So David, like I said, he armed himself with a sling and 5 stones, and he walks down there, and Goliath has all his armor on, but there was a spot right here between his eyes that was uncovered, bigger than a quarter. And so David picked up a sling and whipped it around and hit him right there and knocked him out. And that's how David won that battle. And I think that a lot of times, it's such a great, underdog story, and I love underdog stories, but this is more of an underdog that was prepared. He was prepared for the situation. He was ready for the situation. And even more important than that, maybe sometimes the giants in your life aren't exactly what they seem. aren't quite as big or strong or as bad as you think they are, okay? David was prepared, and Goliath was maybe overrated. And so I don't know what's true or not. This is all myth and legend and out of the Bible, and I think it's a true story, but I'm not sure what is exactly accurate. Hard to say nowadays. But I like the concept that David wasn't just this underdog who got lucky, and he was an underdog who was prepared. He had prepared for the battle before the battle. And when he got there, he found out that maybe the giant wasn't quite who he seemed to be to everybody else. And because he was prepared, he won the battle and has become legend ever since. My challenge to you is this. We're all going to have giants in our life, trials and tribulations. Understand this, the challenges in life are what make you who you become. Your character, your integrity, your toughness comes from being in the trenches, being in the battles, from taking the time to prepare ahead of time, but then not being afraid of the battles. I love a saying that says, I'd rather have a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. And you want to decide that, man, you're going to take your life like a war, and you're going to prepare, and you're going to train, and you're going to practice, and you're going to get good, and you're going to grow yourself, and you're going to face your giants. And if you're prepared, you're going to find out that the majority of those giants aren't nearly as bad as you think they are. You can win.